I wanted to take a couple of minutes here and first of all get my computer to a point where I could actually see. Um, and so this is absolutely wonderful to be here today. Um, my name is Aubrey Davis, 32-year career in both the Army and the Air Force. I was a pilot before I became a lawyer, before I became a professor. So I've had a little bit of a charmed life, but I say that only to go ahead and frame the discussion a little bit because I haven't just been an academic my entire life. I've been in a number of areas where I've seen it from the user all the way up to the policy level. And so that's driven my passion at the Air Force Academy as a director of law and emerging technology to create a space for our cadets and, more importantly, perhaps our policymakers to go ahead and bridge the gap between quantum information sciences, artificial intelligence, and what that means for the future. And so being, I think, the only academic actually presenting here, I'm not exactly sure how to advance the slides here. Is that this way? Okay. I wanted to ensure that I had a comprehensive methodology here. And in order for me to do that, I wanted to start with a thesis. It's a thesis on work that I'm actually presently doing right now for an academic paper. I'm around 15,000 words. To put that into English, I'm at around 30 pages. I think that I'm going to be around 45 pages. And so I want to be able to start with a thesis to build how we should probably go forward in the hybrid intelligence space. In other words, the thing that keeps me up at night, and the thing that's kept me up at night for a really long time, is the hybridization of quantum computation and artificial intelligence, and I'll tell you why in a second. The next thing I want to talk about is assumptions, current risks, current governance models, and then I'm going to offer an antithesis. And I would love to hear from you with regard to what you think is an antithesis to my thesis in the Hegelian dialectic methodology. And then I will go ahead and give you a synthesis as I see it. So to start with my thesis, I think it's important because I've heard time and time again the dialogue of, hey, policymakers just don't get it. Right now, though, policymakers are getting artificial intelligence. It is one of the largest things that anybody has ever talked about. It's a space that a lot of people have occupied. But I would offer that there's something a little bit more to this. Right now, we're dealing with an era of governance that's being solely run by industry. Now, many people that are industry partners and many people that work with us are going to say, like, hey, this is fantastic. You know, we have a time right now when we can go ahead and innovate. We can go ahead and we can push the limit. And that might be the case. But I would offer to you, as an academic, that we've kind of learned this lesson before. We've walked this path before, and it hasn't worked out exceptionally well. And it's mainly been due to transparency. So what I'm offering is we have learned that if you have a corporate structure leading the governance dialogue without transparency, then you end up having yourself set up for problems in the future. And so we've built this architecture based on what we've learned from past mistakes, and that's the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Of course, you've got Dodd-Frank as well, but there's an area of Sarbanes-Oxley that I think is absolutely informative, and I think this matters to industry people. I think the line right now is $150 million, so even if you're a non-publicly traded company, you are nevertheless going to be doing a Form 8K or Form 10 in this space, and I think this is the architecture that we need to go with in a rapid and current basis in English, because you will see time and time again that the people that are creating these laws and creating these policies don't necessarily get the connection. So in order to do that, though, I think it's important to go ahead and define what QAI is as I see it. This is just one person's definition. I won't say that it's perfect. But if I'm looking at the combination of quantum information science, especially quantum computation, and artificial intelligence, there's one commonality that seems to reign supreme. The thing that reigns supreme to me is that quantum, in any of the modalities of quantum computation that you see, is inherently probabilistic. It thinks in terms of probability. It wants to think in terms of probability. And of course, if we're looking at the interpretation, the Stockholm interpretation that allows us to go ahead and resolve it to a 0 or a 1, a qubit, any qubit modality, we nevertheless are looking at it in terms of probabilities. And that's what artificial intelligence is exceedingly good at as well. And it sees these probabilities in terms of the holistic picture. In fact, in many cases, if you're talking to Demis Hassabis and others, they would always tell you that it answered questions that we didn't even know we needed to ask. And that reminds me a little bit of what Einstein said. Einstein said in 1934 in an essay that he wrote about Newton, he said Newton was asking the question. He didn't know exactly the question, though, that he was asking because he answered a different question at the end of the day. A famous perspective. And that's why that has inspired me to do this, to look at this. Now, I want to show you my homework. Now, if you're in my class right now, either that or an international law, I'd say, well, there's going to be a quiz on this tomorrow. Go ahead and do that. And of course, all the cadets will bring out their phones and they take a picture of this. I wanted to show you a little bit of my homework because something very important has emerged from how I have framed this problem. Because I'm starting off with the idea that if you have any of these modalities, everybody is looking towards, hey, which one is going to win? And I would offer to you that it's going to be a hybridization of modalities. Every single time that I looked into a certain modality and its influence or its effect on artificial intelligence and vice versa, this is what I came up with. That every single one of these modalities always are touching different parts of the elephant. So if I'm looking at topological, neutral atom, photonic, any of the others, they have a different way of communicating with the artificial intelligence dialogue in the ecosystem that is exceedingly unique in its own special way. So in other words, I would offer to you that you are not going to have just one win. You're going to have a hybridization of hybridization. That's what's going to win. So it's going to be the people that can be agile in their thinking, agile in their approaches, and creative that are going to be the ones that actually do it. Now I'm going to go ahead and deep dive into a couple here. I know people are really more familiar perhaps with the superconducting gate type Hamiltonian type work. If you're looking at the synergies, the hybrid weaknesses and the quantum AI speedup, you're looking at it specifically in these very simple ways. It absolutely works well with LLMs, VQE, and that it also has precision classifications in the trapped ion area. So we've got a number of companies that are seeing these things already because you really can't ultimately have quantum, in my mind, be truly successful when you're dealing with fault tolerance or the seeking of fault tolerance without having artificial intelligence go ahead and correct for the same. And so as I summarize my findings, these are the kinds of things that I'm coming up with. If you're looking at superconducting, and those are Willow, Eagle, Condor, other types of chips that you're familiar with, and its architectures through TensorFlow, you're looking at VQE. Ion trap, on the other hand, is good for reinforcement learning. If you're looking at the photonic world, that's kind of Xanadu. I don't know if Xanadu has got a table here. I believe that I saw them, but that's a GAN. Neutral atom, combinatorial, topological, QML. And then if you're looking at some of the more, and again, I understand that topological technically is still theoretical. However, in talking to the Microsoft people while I've been here, I think they're making great strides. So I think QML, you're going to actually see that. Then you've also got silicon spin, quantum dot, and then diamond and V. At the Air Force Academy, that seems to be where we're focusing a lot of our attention, just because we have a lot of folks that have PhDs from MIT that come to us, and that's a very good nexus. So as we move forward into this area, we're looking at the risks. Now, you've heard these risks before. Every single time that you hear this, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, you're going to have a quantum computer. Once we create it, it's going to be able to break all RSA encryption. But when you actually look at the experimental space is not suggesting that. The experimental space is saying something a little bit different. You're talking about misaligned superintelligence, and this is what keeps me up at night. If we're really talking about this honestly, Demis Hassabis, Jeffrey Hinton, others who are in the AI space and are leaders in the AI space are all calling for regulation, but they're calling for regulation for RSI, for superintelligence. And I would posit to you that you can't have superintelligence without having quantum computation. They have to be inexorably intertwined. The other is the quantum divide and misuse. You all understand that because you've got centers of gravity and beyond centers of gravity. And so that's going to mean a number of different things as we look at it. So you've got actors that do that. But then there's no mitigation. We've talked a lot about NIST. I've visited the NIST spaces. I've seen their dilution refrigeration. It's just right up this road from us at the Academy. A wonderful facility. Nobel laureates walking around the hallways in their shorts and flip-flops usually. I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting thing. I thought it was cool. Very, very relaxed atmosphere. You've got post-quantum crypto, which is looking to create a moat, but there's really no safety plan for artificial intelligence, right? The combination of the two don't seem to be part of the conversation. So in order to be thorough, I wanted to make sure that I took some time to examine the different types of AI. So in other words, if we're going to have a hybridization system, but quantum with artificial intelligence, does that mean we just bolt it on to an existing artificial intelligence framework or governance framework and then just go with it? And I don't think it's going to work. And here's why. Because we've got the NIST AI RMF, and of course they've got an annex that deals with quantum, right? But then when you look at it, it's innovation friendly, but it's non-compulsory. EU AI Act, kind of an inverse of that, very, very tightly controlled, but it requires companies and others to go ahead and rely on local enforcement mechanisms, so it's not perfect. You've got OECD AI, you've got UK AI, you've got Hiroshima Process and others that all have different aspects that I think are advantageous, but also have drawbacks, and those drawbacks are kind of highlighted for you there. But something that we're seeing here kind of at present is interesting to me. Louis Brandeis, in a 1934 opinion, talked about one of the advantages of the federal system. The federal system in the United States allows states to go ahead and create legislation. Has anybody ever heard of the Colorado AI Act or the Consumer Protection? Yeah, so I see folks looking at that. That is a consumer protection law, but it's actually quite stringent. It models itself off of the EU AI Act, but mainly they're concerned about the misuses of the technology. And so Colorado is especially concerned about algorithmic discrimination, and they're also concerned about enforcement mechanisms through the Attorney General. The TREGA, on the other hand, is more concerned about government misuse of information. So if they're scraping all of your biometric data, clear, you go through the airport, you get your face taken, they want to make sure that the government can't do it. I understand that these are pinch points for a lot of companies right now, and so I think it's very, very important. To summarize, I'm looking at trends then that are emerging from this. You're looking at a movement towards standards-based governance, but there's nothing in there that has any mandatory anything whatsoever. You've got actionable strategies. So people are saying, hey, look, we want to bring this to market. We need this to be meaningful. We need it to give us a return on investment. But at the end of the day, that's the movement that we're seeing. And then we're also seeing export controls and quantum safe mandates. If we were to take the Atomic Energy Act as a lesson, remember, that started with the government knowing everything and the public knowing nothing. We had the ability to go ahead and preempt, basically put a structure in place long before because we knew everything. Right now, it's inverse. Inverse right now because the private sector has kind of all of the toys and all the tools. So I offer an antithesis, of course. Any good academic must do this in order to go ahead and be academically rigorous. And so, isn't it true then that when we really saw Sarbanes-Oxley originally, that what that essentially translated into was this idea of a whole bunch of expenses and everything else like that? But what I would offer to you is if we have kind of that Q moment, if we have something that's unique and something that's dangerous, even if they're finding it in their own risk management framework that they have adopted, they've built themselves, isn't it true that we would need to know? And I think that the public dialogue, not just between us in this room, but between policymakers and business leaders around the world, needs to have this structure. And I think Sarbanes-Oxley needs to be the answer because it's already there. We already know it. It already exists. Thank you very much indeed for your attention and your time. Thank you.